Welcome to Blueprint to Billions, Leverage and Legacy in Apartments.
Welcome back to Season 2 of Blueprint to Billions, where legal strategy meets real estate scale. HUD attorney and multifamily housing strategist Terry Bruner has spent his career guiding developers, nonprofits, and investors through complex housing transactions with a focus on both building legacy and leverage. I'm Evan Mack, and deals don't close on numbers alone, they close on trust. In this episode, Terry will share why relationships are the hinge point in HUD negotiations, how to spot red flags, and what makes connections transformational instead of transactional. This is the Relationship Blueprint. Terry Bruner, sir, welcome back. Good to see you.
Wonderful to see you, Evan.
Absolutely. In the last episode, we kind of ended on the power of connections. So let's kind of dig a little deeper. Why do relationships make or break these deals?
It's a small world, Evan. And when you do HUD deals, it's an even smaller universe than you could possibly imagine. You know, I have been around long enough that deals that we initially worked on, we've cycled our way now through that same deal like two different times. You know, in addition to the initial one, and that's because we represented someone. You know, we represented a client at the initial phase where the project was being built. And now, and then it was sold one time, so a TPA, and then now it's being sold a third time, within a 10-year span of time. And so the only way you're able to do that sort of repeat is because people know the work, they trust the work, they like the work. But frankly, there are any number of lawyers who could do the work. They come because of the relationship. And I think it's true. I'm using that obviously in a personal sense, but it's true also for people who do deals. You'd be shocked. I think you'd be shocked. You'd be shocked how many times there's the same buyer and there's the same seller or there's the same developer, which means that they all know each other. They're doing rinse and repeat business with each other. And these things don't necessarily change over time. You know, we are creatures of habit also. You know, it's like, I'm sure you have things that you like, and that thing is what you like to do. For me, for example, Sunday afternoons, I like to watch a little football. I like to take a nap, and that's my thing. So when Sundays come and I don't get those two things in between 12 and 5, I'm irritated. So
now you gotta get Terry his nap, man.
Exactly, man. I mean, so I'm just saying, like the universe of people who deal with each other because they like each other and because they know what they're dealing with, that's always going to be the same. So preserving the relationship there, it's everything. It's absolutely critical to how business is done.
So let's talk about trust. You kind of said it's the hidden currency. What does that look like in practice, though?
It's what you say you're going to do, you do it.
Mm-hmm.
You show up in the same way every time or most times. Does that mean you're infallible? No. It means that you're going to make mistakes. But when you do make mistakes, you own them and you try your best to mitigate them. But the trust that people have, not only in the work that I do, but the trust that people have in knowing that the universe of HUD deals out there, that the process that they followed last time is generally going to be the process this time, and that what I'm telling you that process is going to be, it's the same process. That trust is like if relationships is like 1A, trust is 1B. Because in business, if you cannot rely on what someone is telling you is going to happen, and you can't rely on that person's word and the actions that follow it, it's really not a whole lot else to do or say. I mean, it's pretty much irreparable at that point. So the trust factor in business is much like the trust factor in a personal relationship, because it is a relationship. People need to know that they can rely on you, that they can trust that you're going to show up, and the things that you say you're going to do, that they actually meet when the practice of it all comes into play.
So in HUD and TPA negotiations, how does one strong relationship tip the scales?
Okay, I'm gonna give you a real example here. Okay,
Yeah.
so there is, and I don't want to geek out on HUD regulations, but there's a part of the HUD regulation world that says there cannot be what's called a tenancy in common structure in an ownership, in an org chart, right? So in other words, like I don't want to send anybody to law school, but a tenancy in common basically means that there are multiple owners. And the HUD rules say that you can only have one owner of a complex. So it's what they
Wow.
call a single purpose entity or a single asset entity. Well, there was a time many moons ago where a client came to me and said, we're doing an exchange, a 1031 exchange, and the only way we can do it um, is through a what's called a tenancy in common. And I knew, and I said, this is going to be really hard because HUD does not allow this under their guides. And they said, there's no other way we can do it. If we're going to do this deal, we have to do it this way. So we need you to do what you can do. So, old Terry had to go and pull as many strings as I could pull in HUD. And it wasn't an easy set of negotiations. I'm going to tell you that right now. The only reason we were able to get that deal through is because the decision maker, I'm not going to call any names, but the decision maker at the time is someone that I had worked with closely while I was an
Wow.
attorney at HUD.
Wow.
And he personally told me, he said, I'm going to do this for you because you've given me assurances in this deal. Here's how it's going to work. And
Mhm.
because it's not a new deal, it was already in the HUD system. He said, but that's the only reason I'm doing this.
Wow. That's strong.
That's the example of what relationship currency is all about. And I was, look, it put me in a very difficult situation because I don't like calling those kinds of, calling out or calling in those kinds of favors because
Right.
you didn't have to do it. And I had some things to say to my client about it. They understood, but it's one of those things where you have to jealously and zealously protect those relationships no matter what.
Well, let's talk about some red flags. What are some red flags that signal a relationship in transactional versus transformational?
When someone says to me, I don't care what you need to do, just get it done.
Mm,
That to me is always, and I understand the sentiment, but what that also says to me is, even if it's not allowed or if it's not typical or if it's not usual, just do whatever the thing is that's going to get me to the result that I want. That's one of the most common flags that I see. I think one of the others that oftentimes comes across is, let's say for example, if there's a timeline at play and we need this done, we meaning client, we need this done
mhm,
tomorrow. So we need you to go and burn all your relationships, all the capital that you have at HUD and any other administrative agency, and get this one thing done for us. Now that's a really tight line to have to
hmm,
navigate because, to be clear about it, as an attorney, I've got an ethical responsibility. This firm has an ethical responsibility to zealously represent our client's interests. And obviously, what the client wants, typically the client gets. But that all comes with a bit of a caveat that within reason, we still have to play by the rules that we are given. And anytime a client wants us to, basically to burn the bridges when there's really no exigent reason to do that, that always sends a flag up my tent pole, so to speak, because I'm always questioning. Well, when the next deal comes, are you going to ask the same thing then? Yeah, it's different,
mm,
like if you've got a real emergency, something needs to happen. Yeah, there's a point at which you just have to kind of you have to do what's necessary. But when it happens every time, that's a
right.
big flag.
So, what about lawyers and entrepreneurs listening? What can they learn about building client trust from the way you handle deal relationships?
I'm gonna come at this slightly sideways. This is true for lawyers, but I think it's also true for most professionals. There are going to be times when you have to make judgment calls. And sometimes those judgment calls don't necessarily squarely align with what people want. And so, in the context of a client relationship, when a client is asking you to do something and it's either not possible or it's going to be very difficult to do it, or doing so, even if possible, would just be imprudent.
Right.
Having a very hard conversation with your client on the front side or whenever it happens to say, I know this is what you want, but this is actually the decision that I need to make in your best interest and for the interest of our firm and whatever our responsibilities are. That's hard. That's very, very difficult. And I'm not sitting here saying that it's not going to lead to bruised feelings or that in some ways it's not going to cause some sort of breach. Maybe even an
Right.
irreparable breach. But what you're able to do in that is walk away, even if that's necessary, knowing that you've held true to a certain set of values and principles. And ultimately, if the client is worth being your client, he, she, they will understand that and they will respect that. And I've
Mhm.
had instances where I've had to tell clients, things that they didn't want to hear and things that were probably not, not what they wanted ideally. And in some ways, decisions that were a little bit different than what they cared to have. But those same clients have also come back because they can trust that I'm going to give them the medicine straight. And
Absolutely
I'm
right.
going to, and I'm going to do it with a smile, and I'm going to try my level best to make them understand, and hopefully they walk away feeling like they've been heard and like things are going to be okay ultimately. But yeah, sometimes it's hard to do, but it needs to be done.
How do you personally decide who's worth investing relationship energy into, when it comes to that kind of stuff? So as far as, because the relationships are important, but that's still time. And how do you navigate that?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, and I wish I could say that it's an exact science. It's more like an art than a science. So some of it's just what your gut's telling you. I mean, intuitively if someone is the type of person or the type of just the type of individual that you feel like meshes with you. So typically, if that happens, then that's someone that I want to spend some time with. But in other instances, you make a decision or you make a judgment call, and sometimes you get into the thing or you get into the relationship and you find out this is not what I thought it was, and then you disinvest in that relationship. That's just part of human life. I will say it's easier if you've worked with clients before, or if you've worked with developers before, or if you've worked with people just in general. You've worked with them before and you have a sense of their track record, because typically past is prologue. So if they've been a certain way in the past, chances are that's going to hold going forward. So making the initial assessment is probably the hardest thing. And once you've made that initial assessment, then it's really about investing the amount of time, as you said, and being intentional about the time that you're investing. Like, all time spent is not equal time. Like
Mhm.
you could easily be spending time with people, but it's not intentional and it's not quality. And so really making the decision or the judgment around, if I'm going to invest with this person, then what's the most efficacious way of investing in this person and in this relationship that I can, and really being smart about that. But some of that comes down again to just what your heart's telling you, and then some of it comes down to objectively how they performed in the past.
You told a story earlier about how your relationship kind of helped the deal get through, a specific deal. But can you share a story where the deal only closed because of the relationship you nurtured years earlier? Maybe something different as opposed to that kind of nuanced one.
Just had one. just had one. So this was a deal that involved an assignment of a housing assistance payment contract. So again, not trying to nerd out, but it was a Section 8 contract that needed to be assigned. There was all sorts of just confusion in terms of who owned the property. I know you're like, how did that happen? Well, it involved someone who passed away, who made a transfer to another entity, and then that entity was dissolved, and then it was transferred to someone else. And
Hmm.
none of this was papered or documented in any kind of significant legal way. Honestly, there was some question as to whether or not HUD would even look at the deal, let alone approve it. And because of a relationship that I had with somebody, with a group of people actually, at a particular HUD office that had been cultivated for many years, that I'd never even had to, I'd never even had to work with these people directly on things, but I knew them, and I would, if I saw them at conferences and whatnot, I'd make a point of saying hello. They knew the reputation of my work over the years and things of that sort. And so when it came time for this particular transaction to close, or to present this transaction, the only reason they considered it was because they knew my work, they knew my reputation, they knew that other people within their department, had spoken highly of the things we were able to do. So we were able to craft a path forward to address some of the deficiencies in the file, and ultimately it worked out. But I really don't think if they had known something of me, I don't think it would have. I think that transaction would have been dead in the water.
So how important is transparency play, in maintaining these relationships?
I think it's a cornerstone. Um, you really have to be judicious, not only in what you're saying, but also in what you're not saying. And I know that sounds like mirror opposites, or mirrors of each other, but what I mean in saying that is that you don't want to divulge everything, particularly when it's about your client.
Right.
So there's some things that need to remain between attorney and client for obvious reasons, but you need to be open enough with the decision makers to say, here's what you really need to know that may not be on the sheet of paper. And you'd be shocked how much of that transparency, how much of that openness has actually given way to establishing new levels of trust. And I've even found that, just from a manager of people perspective also, like, nothing beats vulnerability and openness. And
Hmm.
usually when you are more open to, exposing some of the warts, maybe not all of them, but exposing some of the warts, it generates a level of goodwill that you probably don't have without the disclosure of some of those things. So, obviously transparency, most people think about that in the sense of, are you telling the truth or are you not? But
Right.
transparency is actually more than that. It's actually being open enough to sometimes be a little vulnerable, to move forward.
For people who think I'm not a networker, what's the alternative way to build authentic connections?
Find common interests, find commonalities, find things that you really want to know and explore with people, and then build relationships based on those things. So I'm not trying to give relationship advice or be a guru about anything, but networking has always been kind of a, not a dirty word, but it feels like used car salesman-y. Like, oh, I'm
Right,
going to
right,
this
right, right.
networky event. Now, it's
I
really
hate
about,
I hate those things. Personally, Terry, I just don't. I don't know, man. I feel like I'm like going there to like ask you for something and collect a bunch of cards and beg for a
yeah,
job.
to me, it just feels fake. Like
Yeah,
it feels inauthentic.
it
And I
does.
think that's what I'm getting at is like, if you're not a networker, great. But everyone should know something about what it means to build authentic relationships. And so
Mm,
do whatever is necessary or comfortable for your style. Maybe sending a handwritten card is more your style than showing up, on
right.
Instagram or LinkedIn or something. Maybe, a personal phone call asking someone to go, have a 30-minute coffee chat with you because I'm really interested in X, Y, or Z, and here's what I'm doing. That stuff matters to me and is actually proven more beneficial to me than any of the sort of big networky events. I mean, even from the standpoint of building the practice that I have, building the business that this has become, most of that has been done on the strength of personal relationships,
Wow.
referrals, not showing up at some big trade event where
Mhm.
you're going to run off to this, even big conferences where you're going to run to this session and that session and this session, and you're going to come back home with 20 cards, and your card is lost in the mix of the other 100 that they collected.
Yep.
And so then you're trying to figure out the best way to follow up. It's just never been my thing. So my advice, you're not a networker, just build authentically. Go figure out what works for you, whatever fits your style, and then build from there.
Next time we come back, we're gonna step into the deal room itself. What's one unspoken rule you've learned about navigating power players?
Some of it is puffery. Everyone who has a glorified title is not a glorified individual. Some people are just trying to fake it till they make it, and the people in the room who really do know the deal, who really have the deal acumen, lots of times those people are not going to come across in the way that you think they would. I have just found that the most authentic people, the most grounded people, typically are the most successful people, despite whatever their profiles say or whatever their bluster might foretell. So for me, knowing that knowing that you need to be authentic and showing up as yourself always, and leading with not leading with the knowledge, but leading with your personality and leading with your best self, that then leads to the opportunity for you to talk about the knowledge. Most people make the mistake of leading with the knowledge. It's assumed that you have the knowledge when you step in the room. So you need to build backwards from the other stuff.
Love it. Terry, sir, appreciate the time as always.
Thank you, Evan. Always a pleasure.
Amazing. And thank you all for tuning in to Blueprint to Billions. If you're navigating HUD-backed development and want to elevate your credibility from day one, connect with Terry Bruner at terrybrunerlaw.com. And if you're an attorney looking to build legal practices on your own term, outside of the big firm pressure and into the niche that actually reflects your values, check out Terry's course at thenichepractice.com. Subscribe, leave a review, share this with someone that might find it helpful as well. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.